I see couples here in church who maybe like the 15% of American couples have a marriage where sex is not a joy and a delight, but it's a frustration and a tension and a fight. I see widows and divorced people here in church who maybe really enjoyed sex, but it's part of their past and not their present. I see so many of you that I met just today. It's your very first time in our church, and you thought we were going to be talking about Jesus, and here we are talking about sex, which seems pretty weird for a Christian church to dive into. And maybe there's a whole bunch of you who'd rather talk about so many other things in the Bible except this. So why in the world are we talking about sex in church again? Now, last week, if you were here, as we kicked off this series, I gave you 3 answers to that question. Because the world is, because parents aren't, and because God does. I mean, the world's talking a whole lot about sex. If you have a Netflix account, an internet connection, you go out to the movies, turn on any show, watch YouTube, you're going to learn something about sex, the way it works, who does it, and how they do it, and how often they do it, and when they do it, and where they do it. By not talking about sex in church, we don't give you a blank slate. We just allow the world to teach you everything you should apparently know about sex. I was watching a baseball game with my daughters yesterday, and do you know what commercial was on every time after the third out? Men, if you struggle with ED, and my 10-year-old said, Daddy, what's that? Because the world is talking about sex, and parents aren't. Most of us grew up in homes where our parents didn't say a word about sex, and if they did, perhaps the only word was don't, or wait, or beware, and so we didn't really have a good filter for the world. You know, what of the things we hear is good and what's bad, what's true and what's not, what's realistic and what's fictional. We were kind of left to ourselves to deal with a big issue that affects all of us. But most importantly, we're talking about sex in church because God does. Because you open the Bible and you can't get past the first page before God starts talking about sex. If there's one thing I tried to teach you last week is that sex is not a taboo thing, it's not an embarrassing thing, it's not a shameful thing, it's not a sinful thing, it's actually God's thing. It's a good thing that God invented. In the beginning of the Bible, before there was sin, there was sex. And if you believe that God is good and there's nothing shameful about his character, then what he creates by his very nature must be good, and there must be nothing shameful about it. And so we began this biblical journey talking about sex. It's a good thing. And next week, if you're bold enough to come back, I'm going to teach you that sex is a fiery thing. Just like fire can bring great warmth and beauty into your home, it can also be really dangerous. So if you've ever wondered why Christians are so conservative when it comes to sex, and the Bible has so many rules and regulations, come back for that. And if you're really staying with me, in 2 weeks, I'm going to talk about why sex is unnecessary and totally optional for a satisfied life. What the world would never tell you. Now, the world says 40-year-old virgins are pathetic and to be mocked, but Jesus was a 33-year-old virgin that we worship and respect. So maybe we've missed something about sex. But before we get there, we have to cover something today. And it's a question that many of you have asked me about sex. A few weeks ago, I sent a survey to the members of our church family, and part of the survey said, if you could ask God any one question about sex, what would that question be? And you know what the most common response I got to that was? I'll show you up on the screen. Your number one question, if you're taking notes, you can write this down, is why are we so sexually different? Pastor, why are we so different? Why do I want more sex than my spouse does? Why does my spouse want so much more sex when I'm okay with this much? A bunch of you asked the question, why do guys want it more than girls? And that's not always true. In 7 out of 10 relationships, they say that's the case. But in almost every relationship, there's a difference when it comes to sexual desire. There's someone who we might call the higher desire partner and another that's the lower desire partner. And it might seem like just another difference and another dynamic when it comes to relationships, but this one is different in a powerful way. I mean, if you marry someone and one of you is an extrovert and one of you is an introvert, it probably won't cause that much tension and problems. In fact, those opposites might attract for a reason. You know, you go to a party and one of you likes to talk a lot and one of you doesn't like to talk very much, and it's the perfect combination, but it's not that way with sex. When there are sexual differences and we don't deal with them, the difference can be destructive. And they say one of the leading causes of divorce is not just marriage and finances and kids, it's sex. Because if we don't figure out the difference, the partner who we might call the higher desire is going to feel frustrated and rejected and ignored and perhaps even unloved. If there's only one person in a relationship who seems regularly interested enough to initiate sex, the person might feel disrespected, unappreciated, undesirable, or even unattractive. Give them enough time, and a higher desire partner who often gives and receives love through physical touch and sex will wonder, am I really loved at all? And the lower desire partner has just as many destructive thoughts. The lower desire will often feel pressured and exhausted. He or she feels like she's trying, but it's never good enough, and we're having another conversation and another fight about sex, and I'm never going to meet his needs. I'm never going to satisfy her desires. This gets destructive, and a couple starts to wonder, are we compatible? Are we meant to be together? What's wrong with me or him or her or us or our marriage? And the world doesn't help with that question. Because if you watch the shows and the movies and you listen to the songs, no one tells you about the frustration of sexual differences. Now, sex in the media, if it's one thing, is easy. Right? You just need a look, you just need a spark, you just need a zing, you just need a comment, an innuendo, an outfit, and boom, two people are enjoying sex and they're passionate and they're exhausted and they're satisfied. And so when you see that your entire life and then you get into a relationship and sex is not like that, you wonder what's wrong. It's supposed to be so easy, so why is it so difficult? Why is it so much work for us? If you ever had to wrestle with that, I want to tell you today, I get it. I mean, I really, really, really get it. My wife said I could share a little bit about our journey and our relationship with you, and I want to tell you that my wife and I do not have a really happy marriage. We have a ridiculously happy marriage. Like, can I boast to the glory of God right now? We love being married so much. We got married when we were 22 years old, and I'm so glad we married young because it's been the best earthly thing that has ever happened to me. Someone gave us some advice early in marriage that you should try to pray together every day. You should go on a date every week. You should get out of town every quarter, and you should vacation together every year. And we haven't done that perfectly, but we've tried to, and it's been so good for us. We never get sick of spending time with each other. We laugh together. We loved it. We're going to date each other until we die. I adore my wife. We are on the same page spiritually, financially, relationally, as parents. No disrespect to any of you married couples, but I would not want your marriages because I love having mine. But after 7 years of being married, do you know where we were? In a therapist's office. You want to guess why? Why are we so different? I mean, we love each other. We adore each other. How can we be on the same page with everything in marriage except for this? You see, no one told us when we started marriage the thing that I want to tell you today. The thing I wish I would have heard the first day of my marriage, the thing I wish I would have heard before I even got married. It's a thing that you find in the Old and New Testament. It's right there in the Bible, but if no one opens the Bible and talks about sex, you'll never hear it. And you'll have to suffer the consequences of not knowing it. So today I want to teach you something really, really important. And just so you don't miss it in case you fall asleep on me, let me give you the big idea right up front. I want to teach you today from the Bible that sex is work. That sex is good and sex is from God, but if sex is going to be good and what God intends, it will be work. And that's what we learned from the very first time that sex happens in the pages of the Bible. Last week I told you that the invention of sex pops up on page 1. God says to Adam and Eve, be fruitful and multiply, enjoy sex. And he says it's very good. And page 2, we find out that Adam and Eve are naked and unashamed, but we never hear about them actually having sex until Genesis 4. And how God describes their connection, the first act of intimacy is meaningful and it's beautiful, and I don't want you to miss it. Here's what that passage says. Genesis 4, verse 1 says, Adam made love to his wife Eve. And the verb there is everything, right? He made love. He didn't just have sex, he made love. Think about the billion different ways that we talk about sex. He didn't just get lucky. He didn't just get some. He didn't just get it on. He didn't, do the nasty, the naughty, the dirty. What do we always call it? A bow chicka wow. No, the Bible says Adam made love to his wife Eve. It's like there was no sex without love. And you know what love is? Love is patient. Love is kind. Love isn't rude. It's not self-seeking. It's not easily angered. Love always protects another person. Love always perseveres with another person. God knew, like from the very inception, that if sex was going to be good, it would have to be love. Some of you have been through my premarital counseling course where lesson 1 is about love, and I try to blow up this idea that, love is just some passionate feeling that you fall into. No, love is a choice. It's a verb. It's something that we do day after day after day. We do the work of love, which makes people feel loved. And God knows that leads to good love. But even more interesting than that is how Moses originally wrote those words. You might know that Genesis 4 was written about 1500 BC by a guy named Moses, who wasn't writing in the English language, he was writing in Hebrew. And if you're taking notes, I'd love for you to write this down. The Hebrew word for made love is just one word. It's the word yada in Hebrew. Could you say that out loud with me? Yada. Yeah, one more time. Yada is the Hebrew, and it doesn't actually mean make love. Here's the literal translation. It means that Adam knew his wife. Yada is just a simple Hebrew word that means to know something, like to know the answer to a question. So when God first said that a man had sex with a woman, he said he knew her. Like sex wasn't just about like technique or passion or pleasure. It was about deeply knowing someone. My wife and I read this really great book the other day called Friends, Partners, and Lovers by Kevin Thompson. And Kevin Thompson says he often gets to speak to college students about God and sex. And he has this great opening line. I think I'm going to steal it from him. Here's his opening line. He says to college kids, listen, your parents are better at sex than you are. Can you imagine the looks on these college kids' faces? I mean, first they say, ew, no, I don't want to think about that. And second, not a chance. Like my parents, getting older, gaining weight kind of parent, no way. And he wonders, well, why do kids think that? I mean, why would they assume that the people who have years, maybe decades of experience having sex would somehow not be better at it? And the answer is because our culture has taught us that sex has nothing to do with knowing someone. It's more about acrobatics than it is about true intimacy. It's more about 3 techniques that you read in some article of some teen magazine than about 3 years of doing life together and talking and listening and learning and loving. But God knows what makes sex good. And interestingly, in surveys of Americans, the most satisfied people sexually are old married people. It's not young honeymoon sex that's the most satisfying and passionate. When people truly know each other because they've done life together, sex gets really, really good. Now, I think of how paradigm shifting this idea is that sex is about knowledge. I think it's an incredible relief for people who are about to get married. I think it's the best encouragement for people who are married. And I think it's incredibly liberating for people who are dating and one day hope to be married. And let me tell you why. I brought something with me here today. This is a violin, and I'm about to play it for you. I should tell you, though, that I've never played a violin before. I've been tempted, but I want to tell you, in my 38 years of being on this earth, I've never actually touched a violin. So I asked an incredible violin player from our church, could I borrow your violin? And apparently this is her backup to the backup to the backup of her backup violin. So I don't think she trusts me very much. All right, here we go. I should tell you, I've watched some YouTube videos on how to play a violin. And I even read a couple articles on beginning violin. Show of hands, how many of you think this is going to be awesome? No, I mean awesome, like good, talented. No, those hands went down. All right, here we go. Ready? Wow, that just happened. Well, like, of course you wouldn't expect that to be any good. I've never done it before, so why would we expect that about sex? Like, why would we use the phrase honeymoon sex and think that we're going to know what we're doing? Why would people feel embarrassed when they have their first sexual experience and it does not go well? We would never expect that about anything in life, so why would we expect it about sex? This incredibly liberating thing that takes all the pressure off of our sexual experiences when we read of how that first experience is described, that Adam knew his wife. He had to know her. And how incredible it is when we don't put this tension and pressure. I mean, if sex is really about being comfortable and naked and unashamed and not embarrassed, how freeing would it be to say, you know what, I have no clue what I'm doing, and neither do you, but let's learn together. What a healthy way to approach sex that no one tells us in this world. And if you're married, the same advice is so beautiful. I mean, the best thing about being married is that you have days and weeks. You start to gather years and decades of knowing each other, which is what makes sex really, really good. I mean, you have a chance to study your spouse, to take notes, to learn from the times that go well and the times that don't, for the times you fight and fall on your face and truly connect and are intimate. If you're willing to be a student of your spouse, you'll learn what makes sex really, really good. So I'd ask you questions like this, like when does your spouse feel most connected with you? Like, is there a time of day when she's just like energized and alive? Is she a morning person or a night owl? What's the best time that her mind is going to be most engaged in with it? Well, what kind of man did you marry? Is he spontaneous? You know, if he's in the middle of some work, if he's returning emails, like if you interrupt that and hit on him and put in the moves, will he be annoyed because he really wants to get this job done and check this box, or will he be flattered and willing to put his work down? Do you know that? Do you know your spouse's love language? I mean, is it gifts and flowers? Is it time together? Is it talking and praying and holding hands? Is it a back rub? Is it a thoughtful note? Is it a flirtatious text? Is it an emoji in the middle of the workday? What connects? What kind of person did you marry? Are they comfortable with sex, or do they get nervous about it? Can you spring new ideas on them in the moment, or do they panic and get afraid? And the beautiful journey of marriage is that we get a long, long time to answer these questions. And if we don't see sex as something bad or shameful or taboo, if we can actually talk about this and gain knowledge, we can truly find the foundation that makes sex as beautiful as it can be. It makes me think about a field trip I took a couple years ago with my daughter. We were up in Green Bay, and I saw these female turkeys eating their lunch. And all of them were like pecking seeds out of the ground. And then this tom turkey showed up. Have I told you this story before? I've never seen anything like it. Feathers go up, and he puffs up his chest, like as big as I've ever seen a turkey, and he starts doing this. And none of the female turkeys look up, so he... And I'm just watching this guy, I'm like, dude, like, you didn't yada them. Like, you didn't know, like, this isn't the right time. But, you know, I know a lot of husbands that do that. Like, they strut through the kitchen. They think, you know, I'm going to flex. Maybe I'll take my shirt off and she'll be interested. Like, no, you have to know her. You have to know what she's like. You have to know what makes her feel connected. There's so many guys who think, like, I'm going to put this brash move on, and then we're going to connect, when she can't connect until you talk, until you communicate, until you listen, until you understand. You have to yada. You have to know the person that you're with. I know a lot of women who make a similar mistake. They think through communication and talking, he's really gonna be into me, when really he just wants you to take your shirt off and strut through the kitchen, all right? So you have to know the person that you're with, like Adam knew his wife. But I want to be careful with the generalities, right? Because Adam didn't know all the wives. The Bible passage said Adam knew his wife. Lots of couples get in trouble when they compare their sexual experiences to other people. You know, you hear the American average of how many times a couple is having sex, and you compare and you pressure, but you're not the average American couple, you're you. I've read 84 books on dating, marriage, sex, and relationships. I counted them this past week. And the best thing I've read in all those books, I actually just came across this year, was a pastor who said a couple's sexual relationship is kind of like a child to them. And just like I couldn't compare my child to your child, I can't compare my sex life with my wife to anyone else's. And just like bringing a child into this world, we know it can be a really good thing, but sometimes it's going to be a really difficult thing, and it's going to cost us a lot of time and communication and effort. But that thing, if we put in the work and the effort, it's going to bring us so much joy and happiness. When you have a child together, you don't say, well, this is your kid or this is your kid. No, this is our kid. And when there are problems with the kid, we work through it together as a couple. And when we see sex that way, that there's going to be ups and downs, and we're going to have to figure some things out, and we're going to go through different stages of life. There's going to be pregnancy and depression and anxiety and confusion and stress at work and things we have to work through from our past. But if this is our thing, like this child that we want to raise to be healthy and happy, as it grows older, it will bring us more satisfaction and joy than we could ever imagine. How does the Bible talk about sex? Knowledge. Know each other. Put that knowledge into practice. Work, love, and respect. And sex can be everything that God intended. Which is what the Apostle Paul said. I've been squeezing a whole lot of message here out of that little phrase, Genesis 4, verse 1. But when you get to the most famous section on marriage in the New Testament, Paul makes a really similar point. Let me prove it to you. When Ephesians 5, where he talks about love and respect and husbands and wives, Paul says, for this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. It's a quote from Genesis chapter 2. And one flesh is the reminder that we're not just, one mind or one heart. Like our two bodies are becoming one. This includes sex, so much more, but definitely sex is included. But before Paul gets to that point, he makes a really incredible point about knowledge and about love and about work. Look what he says just a few verses earlier in verse 28. He says, in the same way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. I like that verse. Guys, do you know how much you love your own body? A lot. You might not like the pounds you've put on since high school, but I guarantee you that you love your body a lot, and here's the proof. You know your body, and you work on that knowledge. You know immediately when your body is cold, and you do the work of putting on a sweatshirt. You know immediately when your body is hungry, and you do the work of going to the fridge or driving through the drive-thru. You know when your body is too warm, and so you reach and you immediately do the work to turn on the air conditioning. A man loves his body because he knows it well, and he's willing to do the work to meet his body's needs. And what does Paul say, even before he gets to sex? In the same way, husbands ought to love their wives. They ought to know from all their days and hours and conversations, they ought to know what makes their wife feel loved. And they ought to do the work to meet those needs. Before Paul gets to sex, he wants to say this: know your wife. Ladies, know your husband. Put that knowledge into practice. Do the sacrificial work of love. And then you're truly ready to become one flesh in all the ways that God intended that to be. I might summarize it the way Paul did a few verses earlier. In verse 21, he said, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. You love Jesus. You've been moved by his unconditional love. So submit. Serve each other. Put each other first. And then marriage and this beautiful gift will be what God intended. And I think really that's the answer to your question. So many of you ask me, well, why are we so sexually different? Why is this so challenging? Why is this so much work? If you're taking notes, here's my answer to that question. God's answer is because those differences let you make love. Because when you do the work for someone, they know that you love them. And imagine if both of you in a relationship wanted the exact same thing sexually, you could be totally self-centered and self-serving when it came to sex. But if you're different, then it forces you to love. Then if you're a higher desire partner and your spouse isn't interested when they say no, but instead of pouting and punishing them or turning to pornography, instead you're patient and you're kind and you still serve, they'll know that they're loved. And if you're the lower desire person, and maybe you're okay with sex once a month or once a week, but you pursue more than that, what is your spouse going to know? Not just the momentary pleasure of sex, but that they're actually loved, that you're willing to do the work because you value your relationship and you value them as a spouse. So the differences open up something so much bigger that God cares so much more about, and that's love. But I made you a promise when I started this conversation that every time we would talk about sex, we'd talk about something else. And that something is forgiveness. And before I say amen, I'm going to keep that promise to you, and I'm going to remind you of something that I had you write down last week. I want you to write it down again, that sex is forgivable. That because of Jesus, a virgin who was born of a virgin, sex is forgivable. Which is really, really good news, isn't it? I don't know, maybe I was talking about the good work of good love today. And you're just feeling the burden of sex that wasn't good in your past. Because maybe in your past you didn't do the work that sex required. And maybe you're a person that didn't do the hard work of waiting and you jumped into sexual pleasure before God wanted to give you that good gift. Maybe you were the higher desire partner and you didn't do the work of being patient and being kind. And you turned sex, which is supposed to be so good and comforting and connecting, into a point of tension and conflict and division. Or maybe you were the lower desire partner and you didn't do the work. You thought of what was easy for you, and you worked for the kids and you worked for your boss, but you didn't work for your spouse. And they had nowhere else to go. They made a commitment to you that they would explore their sexuality nowhere else but you, and you gave them nowhere else to go. If that's you, and man, that's been me. How amazing is it that sex is forgivable? That despite the mess, Jesus is crazy with his forgiveness. He's so incredibly patient because Jesus Christ did the work. That's what the Apostle Paul said. And Paul gives all this good advice. Husbands should love his wife as his own body, submit to one another, love and respect, serve, become one flesh. But in the middle of that, do you know what Paul spent the most words on? Jesus. Look what he says in Ephesians chapter 5. He said, husbands, love your wives. And he goes on a big tangent. Just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing with water through the word, and to present her to himself as a radiant church without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish, but holy and blameless. Isn't that incredible? If you believe in Jesus Christ, you are the church that Paul is talking about. Look what he says, that Jesus Christ loved you. He loved you. He didn't just have a feeling. He did the work to love you. He is patient with you. He's not easily angered with you. He does not keep a record of your wrongs. He always protects your soul, and he always perseveres in love. And he didn't just say that. He didn't just write that in a Hallmark card. Paul said Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. And we tattoo crosses on our bodies. We put them up in our churches because Jesus showed the extent of his love, and he worked his way all the way to the cross. Why? Well, Paul says to make you holy. You know, holy means, it means you can look in the mirror and you don't have to be mad anymore. It means that there's not a spot or a stain or a wrinkle or a blemish. It means God sees something beautiful and powerful and kind. It means that the God isn't angry. He's not disappointed. He's not disgusted. He has made you holy. And Paul's not done because he cleansed you by the washing with water through the word. Have you been baptized before? Well, that's what God did for you. He cleansed you. Like you're not dirty to him, no matter how big your sexual struggles have been. He cleansed you so that you're white and pure and perfect and brilliant. And Paul keeps going to present you to himself as a radiant church. Like if you had to stand before God and he knew everything about the past, what would he see? And Paul says because Jesus did the work, he doesn't see someone who's wretched. He sees someone who's radiant. He doesn't see someone who disgusts him. He sees someone who delights him. We are the bride of Christ, and he is not disappointed with his bride because there is no stain, there is no wrinkle, there is no blemish. Because Jesus did the work, we are holy and blameless. Believe that. God's not going to blame you. He will not shame you. He will not be ashamed of you. because Jesus forgave you. I want you to know that sex is good. And if you do the hard work of love, sex gets even better. More than anything today, I got to convince you that Jesus Christ is the best.